Hello and welcome to our webinar on developing an integrated risk and control framework. My name is Jeremy James and I will be presenting along with my colleague Zia Rezvi and supported by our partners Harish Zubana and Vinod Kumar. The webinar will last 1 hour. And there will be time at the end of the presentation for us to answer any questions that you have. At the bottom or top of your screen, depending on how your setup is, there is a Q&A box. So please submit any questions you have in writing and Vinod will then facilitate those at the end of the session. So at the end of the webinar, we will send out the slides for this, and there will also be a link to the recording as well. So today, what we're going to focus on is why developing a coordinated strategy is key to delivering a robust and efficient environment. Then looking at creating the operating model to deliver that strategy and a successful risk and control framework. And then underpinning that, we'll then look at the key challenges to driving successful implementation. And then once that is been put in place, how you can continuously optimize and evolve that control environment to ensure it's fully sustainable. And as I said, we will have time for questions at the end of it. So just quickly to introduce you to Ownet, we are a consulting business focused on business transformation and assurance with a unique consultant ownership model that drives client success and low overall cost for our clients. I'll now pass you over to Harish to introduce Joy IT.
Hello. I'm Harish, Senior Vice President, Technical Services in Joy IT Solutions, and we are the GRC solution implementation partners with Ownet. We are based out of Bangalore, India, and have offices in the US, Australia, Singapore, and South Africa. We have a team of over 80 software professionals in the GRC practice, and we have close to 10 years of experience in implementing GRC solutions across the globe in various domains. Thank you for your time. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Harish. So before I pass on to Zia to discuss the strategy and operating model, I'd like to introduce why an integrated approach is preferable. With complexity, instability, and need for clarity, there is an unprecedented focus on enhancing controls and code of conduct within organizations. Whether it's internal controls over financial reporting, e.g. SOX, ESG, operational resilience, cybersecurity, other regulation, there is now a great deal of attention on establishing integrated control frameworks for regulatory requirements and strategic advantage. Unless you're able to view your organization through multiple lenses and develop a single truth, there will be increased risk to silos, lack of empowerment of people, and knowledge drain on the organization. However, by developing an integrated framework and structured approach, you will mitigate these risks and enable your organization to be agile, transformative, and controlled. An effective framework will ensure that your organization enables visibility, efficiency, and a culture of empowerment and doing the right thing at the right time, first time, while detecting and preventing fraud and material mistakes. Our framework is built on 4 key resources being deployed from inception to evolution of your framework. These are namely people, process, technology, and data. So during this webinar, we'll take you through how to develop the framework from strategy to continuous improvement based on these 4 key elements. Zia will now take you through the strategy development and why this is key to developing a robust and efficient framework.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. The pandemic. The role that the risk and controls community played during the pandemic should remind us that a strong internal control environment can help organizations become more agile, resilient, and support accelerated digital transformation. To build on these positive outcomes and the many challenges ahead, leaders should develop a coordinated framework approach that clearly aligns to the wider business strategy. For example, the strategy could link to an organization's underlying business purpose and goals, and if well executed, can assist in embedding a comprehensive control environment that thrives in a volatile and complex business environment. A coordinated strategy must involve risk management. This is key to delivering a robust and efficient control framework. And as a starter, questions needs to be asked like, what is the risk appetite of the organization? What is the key risk impacted on the organization, such as political, economic, social, technological, legal, or financial? And finally, how mature is the risk management process in the organization? And it's that level of maturity which will have an impact on the implementation of an integrated framework. In addition to building a risk-based control framework that is driven by data, other risk and control framework strategy goals leaders can consider, such as maximize the use of technology in operating and monitoring controls, embed control framework in the first line day-to-day business, establish an integrated smart reporting framework, and introduce a positive controls culture to guide the business to achieve its goals. In developing a coordinated strategy, we can simplify the process by looking at 4 core elements: people, process, technology, and data. The role of data has become very critical as organizations increase their technological maturity and gather more data. The added volume may expose insufficient controls and potentially lead to unreliable outputs. Shifting to a data as an asset mindset can help enhance data integrity and quality and generate more comprehensive value-adding outputs to inform business decisions. So if you thought that SOX was a big lift, ESG is going to be even more significant due to the vast range of disparate data to be gathered, synthesized, analyzed, and understood. Unlike the financial systems at the center of SOX, it is likely the data will be unstructured. So it is all these key elements which will help us to shape a fit-for-purpose risk and control framework. So what are the other considerations in terms of these 4 elements? Well, let's look at people. What quality of people we want to retain and attract to achieve the company's vision? Who are the key stakeholders in the future organization? From a process point of view, are we looking to establish the best-in-class set of controls? Are we aiming for being agile in meeting compliance requirements? And finally, are we going to establish a set of processes and controls which have zero tolerance for deficiency? Looking at data, what level of reliance, transparency is management seeking out from data? How will this data be used to achieve the strategic objectives of the company? And technology, what kind of technology will be required to deliver the strategy? Is it going to be established or cutting edge? How is this technology fitting the long-term objectives? Having established a clear strategy of the vision of the ideal framework, it's now time to consider the operating model. What do we mean by operating model? Basically, it is a blueprint of a firm's vision of a well-controlled organization that aligns operating capacities and strategic objectives and provides an overview of core elements, which we already described: people, process, technology, and data. Looking closely at these core elements in an operating model, for people, I think we need to have a flexible 3 lines of defense model where a governing body oversees first line and second line management, which is monitored by an internal audit function. This model ensures the right people are placed in the right position to ensure accountability, delegation, and oversight. It is also a system which ensures the most qualified persons are appointed. From a process point of view, we need a robust end-to-end risk management cycle, which includes risk response, identification of control activities, event identification, monitoring mechanism, all supported by an information and communication ecosystem which spans the whole organization. For technology, we need a fit-for-purpose governance, risk, and compliance platform which supports the organization's process activities and which is integrated, auditable, simple, secure, scalable, and allows an intuitive user experience. Finally, for data, there should be a regular extraction of data from a company's information system to perform data selection, classification, filtering, and other functions to provide meaningful KPIs about business processes and controls. There should be a protocol to identify the right data set, which is reconciled and formatted, allowing the identification of outliers. And finally, we should formulate a strategic use of data analytics, enabling management to survey an entire population rather than examining a sample during manual process. I will hand over to Jeremy for the next part on implementation.
So thanks. Just as a reminder, if anybody has any questions on what they've heard so far, please add those to the Q&A. So now that the blueprint for the integrated control framework is developed, the key is to embed this into the organization and culture by ensuring the strategy and operating model that was underpinned is basically implemented in a structured manner. Implementing anything is fraught with its own risks and challenges. These challenges will manifest themselves throughout the implementation lifecycle and will snowball if not addressed early in the project. At the core of mitigating risk, a robust program needs to be set up with a clear charter and plan to deliver the defined strategy and operating model. From the start of the project, the right people need to be in place with the right skills to enable project discipline, subject matter expertise, and communication to the organization. The earlier the communication, the better the adoption of the desired risk and control culture will be. Communication needs to be central to ensure adoption of the desired culture. To drive a successful delivery, we have developed a 10-point implementation cycle with governance as its core. Remember that implementation is not the same as doing, When first implementing the framework, there is a very high risk that it is forgotten, resulting in rework over a number of years and issues that have to be resolved on an ongoing basis. So I'll now take you through the challenges needed to be addressed. So the first three activities are key to developing a successful integrated framework that has agility and repeatability. There is a risk that these are rushed, as some of the high-level work here will have been completed during the strategy phase, as Zia pointed out. However, now is the time to set up the processes, define the skill set, and to configure and develop the policy for the right level of controls across the environment, determining the scope and materiality criteria that will be used to determine which entities, geographies, and activities come into scope for different parts of the integrated framework. The risk assessment should be a periodic process that contains both quantitative and qualitative measures as appropriate, and policies and structures should be set up in advance to inform how the risk assessment is completed. This is not the same as doing the risk assessment, as mentioned. And remember that not all entities, geographies, or functions will have the same materiality when it comes to risk types, and to ensure that your framework is fit for purpose and can be embedded into your culture, it is key to make sure that the right level of focus and awareness is developed at the right levels without overburdening the organization with unnecessary processes and controls. Finally, the control framework needs to be developed to ensure that all risks are addressed at the right time and the right level. The key challenge here is to develop an integrated framework that incorporates the requirements of different regulations and requirements, and this may mean a blend of different industry standards coming together or consolidating. This can be complex work and needs to be done in a way that ensures agility, enabling new regulations to be incorporated at a later date during your continuous evolution of your framework. So once the framework is developed, the infrastructure to manage this needs to be developed. This is a critical element to ensure an embedded and sustainable framework. By ensuring the right governance, skills, and technology, the organization will have the ability to build a foundation to future-proof and mistake-proof the entire risk and control framework, and further embed this into the culture of the organization. So firstly, we'll look at technology. One of the greatest traps that organizations fall into is to think that the use of spreadsheets for first year of deployment is a strategic enabler, giving agility and flexibility to make changes as you develop your thinking. However, more often than not, this will lead to a lack of control, increased risk of inefficiency within the core function that is there to govern risk in the organization, and lead to years of inefficiency and rework. Secondly, assurance of reporting and ability for all stakeholders to be empowered to act and report correctly is driven by the right roles and responsibilities of individuals, along with the processes to drive clear accountability and visibility to all levels of the organization. Without the setup of these workflows and structures, the risk of misstatement and gaps becomes extremely high and makes it impossible, or nigh to impossible, to drive a sustainable culture and enable senior management to attest to their control environment and measure the outcomes. So finally, all of this relies on training. Training and communication is not a one-off exercise, or for the few who are core to the control and risk function. Every individual in the organization should be trained on their responsibilities, given awareness of what it means to have control and risk as a core strategy within the organization, and for them to understand their roles. And periodically, this should be refreshed and confirmed by everyone in the organization. So to drive a truly integrated control culture, every individual in the organization needs to have the right level of training at the right time. So now that the framework is embedded with governance, we can focus on the design and documentation phase. This phase is very labor intensive. However, it is a major contributor to embedding culture into the organization and drives awareness of the controls across a large population. The biggest challenges in these phases are one, around resource. This is usually a side of the desk activity for a large number of people who have day jobs on top of doing this. So it's important to put the structures in place to facilitate, encourage, and celebrate the work being completed. And this starts at the training phase that we've just talked about, going all the way through to one of the second high risks in this area, which is quality. And going back to the training, without that and consolidation of knowledge and ongoing quality assurance, the design and documentation can become a cycle of rework with overly complex and inefficient controls that drive inherent risk into the framework and ability to address those risks. So the big message here is ensure there is rigor in the design of your controls, and at the same time, ensure that you give the resource the attention and the time they need to actually do the work. Then the final structures, but not least in any way, is the need to set up a fully integrated and continuous risk and control structure, the ability to test and audit the processes and controls. And enabling this to happen, you will be able to ensure an ongoing assurance and improvement that Zia will talk about shortly. One of the big challenges around testing is to ensure that reliance can be assured by different lines of defense and management on the appropriateness and robustness of the control environment as an integrated framework and not just as individual controls. Also, there should be a focus on reducing the costs, inefficiencies, and resource required to add value to the work being completed. And this will obviously, from testing, lead to issues being identified. And it isn't a bad thing that issues are identified. It's about how you then deal with those issues and making sure that there's the structures in place for stakeholders to have the ability to analyze, report, and understand the materiality of those issues. And processes need to be developed that enable insights on potential systemic issues across different parts of the business. So this is where you want to be able to ensure you have processes in place where if a gap is identified in one part of the business, that people can identify if that is a type of gap that may manifest itself in other parts of the business, therefore creating that systemic risk. When looking at this structure, management needs to be able to report on this, and it's key for senior management to be able to attest to their effectiveness of the control environment. And then with remediation and the resolution of those issues needs to be project managed, and a structure of ownership and governance should be developed to be able to enable clear reporting and prioritization and to ensure that those issues are resolved in a timely and effective manner. So in summary, we've been through some of the key challenges that arise as you go through the implementation cycle and how to mitigate these. If there is one message to take away, ensure that you stay aligned with your strategy and operating model through clear communication, project management, and having the right people involved in the implementation program. This will result in a repeatable, agile, and embedded framework that can evolve over time with your business. I'll now pass back to Zia to discuss control improvement.
Thank you, Jeremy. So taking the next level, having implemented the control framework, we're looking to improve on the framework. And the objective is a world-class framework that is set of control infrastructure, which is highly automated, self-updating, creating a competitive advantage. There is also extensive use of real-time monitoring and executive dashboards. Looking at the 4 elements that we should focus on, starting with people, we should focus on increasing internal control awareness, invest in developing risk culture, and establish a structured training in staff development. From a process point of view, we should aim to have a continuous internal controls maturity assessment to see how far we are in our journey. We should maintain a log of activities, which needs to be looked at constantly in terms of whether there needs to be stopped, new activities needs to be started or improved. And we should focus on preventative controls rather than the detective type of controls. From a technology point of view, we should exploit AI and machine learning models, which can be used to shift from a reactive look-back control to a control that is proactive and predictive. And finally, we should establish an automated control testing. In terms of data, there are pattern analysis that can be carried out. We can identify anomalies and exploit modeling and visualization. We can introduce predictive warning. And finally, a very powerful feature, which is data stories to communicate issues. And I think that is it for our presentation. And we are now going to move on to questions and answers.
So hi, Vinosh, have we got any
Well, so thank you so much, Jeremy and Zia, for the wonderful presentation. So now we will go to the question and answer. So we have few questions from the audience. I'll just read out to you. You can answer those. The first question is, how do you ensure engagement from all levels of the organizations?
shall I take this, Zia, to start with?
Yeah, you start. Yeah, go ahead.
So, as we said, communication and engagement is absolutely key when it comes to making sure that this gets delivered into the culture of the organization, and putting those governance structures in place that take communication from the board who are setting the strategy to senior management who are setting the operating model that is driving that strategy, through to the program team that are implementing the structures to deliver that operating model, to the rest of the organization, needs to be linked up so that you can then have two-way communication through that organization. Now, with new technology, I would always say that, making ease of communication and empowering your people at all levels and all geographies, all functions, really will make a difference. And being able to facilitate that through technology is now in place. And there, as I say, there's a lot of technology there. Zia, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that as well.
No, I think you were spot on. I would just add a couple of things in terms of engagement is to make sure that you exploit all the communication channels available in the organization to reach out to key people. I think that's quite important. And the other point that you made, Jeremy, which also I feel very strong about, that is empowering people. Is identifying the people with the right skills and enthusiasm, really try to get them interested in the project, So they don't feel that it is a tick in the box exercise, and they feel that there is something they're empowered to do and something which will help them personally, but also for the whole company.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we have one question from Henry. So that's an interesting question. So how can we use AI to identify reactive and proactive issues related to the control environment, considering that we need to reach out to people to understand the process?
So I think this is a, sorry if I could start, Jeremy.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say this is really much about the how you perceive, how you use data within the organization, and it is basically using various AI technology to replicate various scenarios and extrapolating the result, the output of these scenarios, and portraying them in a sort of visual representation, which is easy for management to follow. And based on that, you can reach out more people.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, the use of AI for root cause analysis and for conformance tracking, from what is the designed control framework to what is actually happening in the business, becomes a very powerful enabler to be able to detect any issues, especially in high-risk environments where you may have a need for very short-term surveillance over what is being done. So you can turn around an event, which can be any arbitrary control issue event using AI through that technology, and then later using it from a perspective of being able to analyze those gaps, understand the root cause of them, and be able to remediate those in a much more efficient time frame.
Thank you so much for both the answers, Azia and Jeremy. So the next question is, how do you pick the best GRC technology vendors?
So I don't mind taking this one to start with, Zia. So, there's a lot of GRC vendors out there, as I'm sure everybody knows, and there are some very mature tools out there that are very good at pulling all the different types of frameworks and different types of risks into a single place. Now, before you sort of jump into looking at who's on which analysts frameworks, and who's with Gartner and Forrester and Everest, etc., it is worth first focusing internally on what your requirements are from a GRC tool. What is the nature of your organization, and what will be the best fit for you? Now, in reality, most organizations have multiple control and risk functions throughout their organization, and they may have different technologies in place already. So it's not about necessarily replacing every single technology, but it's about how do you aggregate from those technologies into an oversight of that. So, for us, I would say the big thing is understand your requirements, understand your environment as an organization, then obviously look at the different providers out there, start with a long list, go through to a short list, make sure you have a proper tender process that looks at their technology, their maturity, how they partner with their clients, and then take it from there.
Fantastic.
I just want to add in terms of the GRC vendors is also to treat them like business partners, to engage with them and make sure that they understand your business and restrictions and stuff like that, and understand your values to make sure that the partnership is very strategic and there's benefits for the company.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your answers. So the next question is, I'm not sure, as an anonymous here. So the question is, how do you ensure management approaches an internal control framework as more than a just legal requirement?
Yeah,
I could start.
Go for it then, Zia. Yeah.
I could start. Yeah, I mean, it's about. I think this was briefly covered here in the presentation. It's about aligning your strategic vision and values with the framework. You want to be best in class. You want to aspire to do something better, to have a better organization, to minimize fraud, or to have a well-controlled organization. So you need to have these values set out openly in the organization so people can look up to those things and believe that it's more than just a legal requirement. It's not just a tick in the box, but it is something that the organization is very proud to have. It's something which will enable, hopefully, to raise share prices, to have a stable organization, and have happy customers, but also aiming to have employees who know that they are part of an interesting and exciting journey, where they will not only benefit to work for a great organization, but also develop some new skills.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, for me, it just connects straight back to, as long as the senior management who've developed the strategy have a linkage and measures and metrics through the operating model, through to the frameworks and the ways of working and how you're capturing your controls, and people understand their roles and responsibilities within that, then you will ensure that it's not just a tick box exercise. But as soon as that is delinked and decoupled, then you'll find that it becomes a tick box for year end, and you know there will be risk, and then you will have issues within the business. And you know, so often businesses only react when an issue occurs. The whole idea of a successful framework is that you do not see those issues, and that has to be kept being reminded to all levels of a business, that by not seeing those issues does not mean that the risk framework is not necessary. It actually means that it's doing its job.
Thanks, Gia and Jeremy. I'll just read out the next question for you. So what's the role of the board and the senior management?
So I think, you know, to be honest, it's a little bit as I just mentioned there. You know, the board and the senior management are there to set the strategy, set the culture and the tone from the top. And it's very important that they walk that talk, so that there is this element of doing the right thing at the right time and getting it right first time. And they are there to ensure that there is a prioritization on the people who are in the operation of your organization. You know, if they take their eyes off this as a priority, then the rest of the organization will take their eyes off this as a priority. So it's for them to really be the leaders that drive the need for this and the culture and will to keep on doing this.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jeremy. I think it's they play a very critical role. It is at the end of the day a tone from the top, and I believe they should use all channels to make sure that people are aware that controls is on very much on their agenda. So yeah, definitely a very important role they have to play.
Thanks, Gia and Jeremy. So I'll read out the next question for you. The next question is, how do you choose the right framework when there are so many different requirements depending on the regulations and jurisdictions?
Yeah, so as that question says, I mean, there are so many different regulations, so many different frameworks. So it's not about picking that one, because you know, in every organization, you've got ISO certifications, within, your internal controls over financial reporting, you have your COSOs, your COBITs. Within cyber, you've got, your NIST, you've got SOC 2, you've got GDPR, and then within ESG, you've got the likes of TCFD, GRI, etc. So, as I said in one of the other answers to one of the other questions, a lot of organizations have specific functions that are governing different risk areas, whether that be ESG or internal controls over financial reporting or cyber risk, etc. And it's not to say that all of that needs to be pulled together and only have one single centralized framework. It's about making sure that those frameworks are not having to be duplicated. So in many frameworks, they will have the same control objective over the same risk type. And it's ensuring that you then only capture that once, making sure that people identify where it's relevant to either, a cyber or to, the environment, sustainability, or over financial controls, and then pulling that together. So you're answering those control objectives once, you're controlling it once in the same way, but you're also making sure that you don't have parts of your organization that are having a burden of processes and controls where they're not necessary because they're not material in their function. So, simply said, it's about looking at those different frameworks, pulling them together to make sure that they can be cut and diced into a logical form that allows structure and no silos in place that has the risk of gaps within your framework.
Thank you so much. I'll read out the next question for you. That's from the audience. So what is the best source of risk control and catalogs?
Sorry, can you say that again, Vinod?
Yes. So what is the best source of risk and control catalogs?
So again, I would go back a little bit to the answer that I just gave, that it isn't so much that there are, best single risk and control catalogs. It really is about what you are trying to ensure that you have control over. And Zia mentioned this earlier, when looking at the operating structure, you want to sort of ensure you've got more around preventative risks, preferably automated risks, but you also need to have a balance between enterprise risk management and transactional controls as well. And getting that balance is absolutely key to making sure that, one, people don't see this as tick box exercise, and two, to make your framework robust. So it's bringing those together, and this is where technology absolutely helps, because if you're doing this on spreadsheets, it's impossible to manage. But if you're using a mature platform that is built to manage these different types of risks, then you can bring those frameworks together, and it's multiple different frameworks. Some of the ones I mentioned earlier will give you that capability.
Thank you. Fine. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'll just read out the next question for you. So how do the ISO management systems like 9001 or 114001 influence as a risk management?
Yeah, so again, the ISOs, and you've mentioned a couple there, and you've got 27001, which is more on the technology side, etc. They are giving you an operational policy framework with very set questions that you can answer to make sure that you are covering off the risks that those questions are posing. And the reason that obviously ISO is powerful is that you've got a clear certificate with auditing on a periodic basis that gives comfort to customers, suppliers, that you as an organization operate in a structured and controlled manner. Now, that's no different to a COBIT framework, a COSO framework, a NIST, etc. So it's about using ISO alongside the other frameworks to ensure that you have this fully integrated capability and not a silo of the quality team do ISO in a corner, and then you have your financial control guys doing something in their corner and your sustainability guys doing their controls in another corner, when ultimately all of this, plus others, third-party risk, etc., all of this is about making sure that you manage your business in the right way. You can report to stakeholders and disclose the right information so that people can make informed decisions about doing business or investing in your organization.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'll read out the next question for you. What should the central risk and control team structure be? In our organizations, we have multiple risks and control functions.
Yeah, if I can just start with that one. I think I did mention earlier about there is a recombinant structure, which is the three line of defense, having an oversight body over first line and second line, monitored by the internal audit function. And I think it's a question of deciding, it's on the size of the organization. How do you want to structure that? Do you want also to consider having a center of excellence, a center which monitors all of that? This is probably one of the ideal scenario to have. What is very important is to make sure that you minimize the amount of duplication in the work. So having a central, probably a risk register would be helpful, and making sure that there is communication between each team to ensure that the work is consistent and value added. Jeremy, you want to add anything further?
Yeah, I think, I would also go back to, if you were building a greenfield site, you might take a different approach with your sort of central risk function and have that, all reporting through to either a single CRO or into the CEO's office. But in reality, there are experts in different areas who have built control functions at the management level, correctly so. And therefore, it's about bringing all of those different areas of expertise together at the right level. So, as I say, it's not about replacing all of those, but it's about ensuring that it's integrated and that you can make sure that there's no silos between those different groups. And it is also good to have those, challenges between those different groups. So when you're coming up with your integrated framework, it isn't something that is created in a black hole on its own. It has to involve all of those different operating functions, and then seeing how that governance structure sits above that to bring it all the way back up to ultimately the CEO, CFO, who have to attest on their control environments, have to ensure that there is reputational risk that's managed, political risk, social, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Zia and Jeremy. I'll read out the next question for you. Is it best to capture controls within process documentation or standalone as a narrative?
So in my experience here, this is about two elements really. You've got people who consume information in different ways. Some people very much like clear narrative documentation that they can read through. Other people like to see pictures, so process maps, process models that depict that narrative. And there are technologies in place, GRC technologies, that enable the capture of both of those in a single instance, because what you don't want to be doing is capturing process models and narrative for different audiences. So you want to be able to capture once, but be able to have people consume in the way that suits them, and that helps with the culture. It helps with embedding your framework and your culture of controls. And as I say, there's good technology out there that enables that. In reality, a lot of this is you'll capture a process and then you'll add descriptives to that process within that technology. And then you can also add a lot of metrics behind that, so that you're starting to get some very powerful information about your controls and about your processes that enable you to do, sort of deeper analysis, and goes back to one of the questions that was asked earlier about using artificial intelligence and being able to simulate what would happen in this scenario. So, if you're doing scenario testing within this, all of those metrics that have been captured can be used for that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. So we have one last question to read out. In your experience, to what extent is the use of AI analytics helps aggregate unstructured data in non-common scenarios?
Shall I take this again, Zia?
Yeah, you start. I have got some thought too, but you go ahead.
So again, I think we touched on this a little bit. AI is still truly developing, and a lot of organizations don't necessarily have the granularity of data to be able to build up that knowledge to make informed AI decisions on unstructured data. However, that as data is captured and as data is able to be analyzed more easily and quicker, that is changing. So there's always a start point, but as that becomes more prevalent with the data in place, you are able to use AI to help with those root cause analysis, with scenario testing, with the ability to make very quick decisions on what actions are required if you have to have very rapid surveillance over something, but also to help you with improvement of your control framework on an ongoing basis. So this stuff doesn't have to be reported exactly as and when. The action may be to be able to aggregate that for a monthly review to to see what it is that we want to be prioritizing as far as improvements.
Yeah, I would I would add that there is a statistic to say that 85% of any organization, the data is unstructured. And I think the biggest challenge has always been about processing the data and having clean data before making a proper analysis. But I would add that we are very fortunate that in the industry there's a lot of great vendors and tools available to process that unsorted data, and we should not just think about the typical business intelligence tool, but we should also think about the robot process automation (RPA) vendors who are also very, very strong in this domain.
Well, thank you, Zia, and thank you, Jeremy, for answering all the questions. The session was actually informative. Thank you for the insights. So now I'll pass on to Jeremy. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody, for those questions. So we're just coming up to the hour, so perfect timing. I hope that everybody found this webinar of interest. And if you have any questions that you'd like to follow up on, please feel free to contact us on the details here. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending out the slides from this webinar, and also we'll send you the link for the recording for you to either share with colleagues, or if you're that interested, to watch again. But yeah, I look forward to hosting you our next webinar, and thank you very much for attending.